2 years ago, the first time we did the Antidote series, you guys stopped me in the middle of my presentation on the heavens and the earth and asked me what about masculine and feminine. Why is it that masculine I had marked as associated with heaven and feminine I had associated with earth? And, immediately our brains go to like, oh, that must be because the men are better and the women are worse. So I fought you off and prevented myself from going down that rabbit hole during that presentation, and it took me 2 years to get to the point where I feel like I can actually offer you something of value. So in that presentation, we were laying out the ancient Christian cosmology. How is it that ancient Christians understood the world to work? And we started in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we talked about how, sort of our modern pop culture lens, we're like, oh, heaven's this place in the clouds that we can't see, but we know it's there, and earth is where we are. And we talked about how, the way they understood it was more, there was this seen realm, earth, the material world that we see around us. You're part of earth and all the physical stuff. And then the immaterial world, right? So we have the seen and the unseen, the visible and the invisible. And then, the things that are in heaven are the things that matter. On earth we have matter, but in heaven we have what matters, right? So truth and beauty and goodness and love, all these transcendental categories or energies from God, these are the things that come from the heavens. And then as humans, we sort of look up into the heavens and we see love, and then we bring it down and we embody it here on earth, right? So in this way, we're not just, gonna go to heaven someday. We're actually participating in heaven and participating in God today, right now. And so the heaven is also associated with order, right? So the heavens are sort of like telling us like, this is the way things should be. And then the earth is potential that can embody that. The earth can actually be, can reorganize itself in that order. Then you have seed, soil, inhale, exhale. There's sort of this order. Everything starts in heaven and then gets embodied on earth. As we go through the creation story, you see, God speaking reality into existence, right? Speech is invisible. It's information. It comes down from heaven, and then the earth is actually manifesting it physically in reality. And so masculine and feminine are tied to the same pattern, where one is sort of initiatory and one is more receptive. And we're going to get into in more depth what that actually looks like. As I was putting this presentation together, it was really a rewarding experience for me, because I started just trying to understand these theological principles, and as I was working through it, I started to see all the pain and suffering and arguments and fighting and political drama around us reflected in the work that I was doing. And so I think what you'll find is that this masculine and feminine, these patterns are actually really explanatory, have a lot of explanatory power. So again, just recapping, the reason that our society, our culture is structured in the way that it is in this sort of postmodern worldview is we started with nominalism. Nominalism basically said there is all these transcendental categories, all this stuff from heaven, this actually isn't real. These are just social constructs. We just made it up. And then materialism comes by and says, yeah, in fact, nothing, unless it's material, unless it's physical, it's not real, period. And then modernism is sort of this, taking it one step further, saying, we're really going to focus just on rationality, just on reason, just on logic. All this mystical stuff really sort of needs to go away. If we can't prove it with science, it doesn't exist. And then postmodernism is actually sort of like this rejection of modernism, saying like, whoa, like, this is kind of tyrannical. You telling us this is exactly how it needs to be. Postmodernism, instead of trying to posit a new hierarchy, trying to say we should focus on these things instead of that thing, postmodernism instead just rejects hierarchy altogether. They just say, there is no good, there is no right, there is no wrong, there is no true, there is no beauty. It's just flatland, right? So that's how we got to where we are. And so here we are in like this really scary time where things, seem like they're tipping left and right. It's like the, political clock swings too far one way and then too far back the other. And the bridge, the structure that's holding society together sometimes feels like it's going to crumble. And if you talk to somebody on the left, they might point to corrupt patriarchy as the problem. And I'm defining this as somewhat tied to modernism and then chaotic feminism. If you ask somebody on the right, they'll point to chaotic feminism that, hey, this is this postmodern relativistic chaos is really a problem. And what I've done here is I've sort of defined each one by their opposition. And so you can, on the patriarchy side, we have sort of imposed conformity. This is how it should be, and it can be no other way. Our identity is sort of reduced to our biology, like this, this is what it is, and there's nothing spiritual about it. And then hierarchy can be used to sort of like control people, right? And on the other side, you have sort of this complete rejection of traditional roles, self-expression, as opposed to sort of like discernment. Self-expression becomes paramount. So if you have a feeling, if you have an urge, you should express that. And then your identity is something that's malleable. It's totally up to you. You get to decide who you are, right? And those darn doctors trying to define you at birth are really tyrannical oppressors. And then all hierarchy is oppressive. And then finally, the idea that I'm going to focus on tonight is that equality is sameness. Right? So when I was growing up, equality was like equal opportunity, right? Okay, you both get to play the football game, you both get the same rules, hopefully the referees are operating in the same way. That's what equality is, but now it's sort of being defined as sameness, or like putting your finger on the scale to achieve a certain result. So in this worldview where equality equals sameness, the culture begins to reflect this philosophy, and you see this in all sorts of different media. And what you'll see in our modern characters is that the femininity, what we would have traditionally called femininity, is being suppressed. You can't have female characters as too feminine, or they will be rejected. And the opposite with masculinity. If we have too much masculinity in men, that's dangerous. They're clearly a bad person. And so we have to suppress their masculinity. And then the opposite, masculinity needs to be expressed, emphasized in women, and femininity needs to be expressed, emphasized in men. I have a few examples here. The retreatment of Galadriel in the new, from the Lord of the Rings and the new TV series versus the movies, the books. In the books, she's treated, this wise feminine character who plays this nurturing role over the fellowship, and critically, Frodo offers her the ring and she rejects it and doesn't take the power. And in the new one, she's just sort of like this aggressive masculine ass kicker who just beats everybody up. She's just better. So two same exact character treated differently in two different cultures. And then in Star Wars, we have Luke Skywalker, who sort of has to go through this major struggle to become the Jedi that he's meant to be, whereas Rey just sort of has it from birth, right? Like, she can't be worse than Luke. She can't be seen to struggle. She has to just be hyper competent at the onset. Mulan is a story about a female hero overcoming natural obstacles, right? She has to she takes her father's place at war, and she enters this hyper masculine arena, and the way she overcomes her male protagonist is that she has to not be a better man, but instead she has to be more wise than they are and have more perseverance. She works harder, she's more thoughtful and intentional and driven to accomplish her goal. Whereas in the new one, she just kicks the shit out of everybody. She's just better. She's basically a superhero. She's a better warrior than all the warriors, and the story suffers as a result. As a child of the 90s, I thought that the fathers through sitcom was also another good lens to see this problem through. So, do you guys see any of these shows? So on the left here, we got more of the traditionally masculine figures. I originally had Cosby up here, and then somebody pointed out to me that was a bad idea. The Cosby character was really quite good, but I did Carl Winslow here instead, a very masculine father figure, but also loving and caring. Andy Taylor on the Andy Griffith Show is probably my favorite. And then as you sort of move forward in time, you know, it's no longer so trendy to have this traditional masculine figure, father figure, who can direct his family appropriately, and you start to have this situation where we have to have more of a foolish father. You have to have somebody who can be poked at and made fun of, and that existed at the beginning too, right? Like Andy made mistakes, Carl Winslow made mistakes, but they just needed nudging once in a while. They had it 90% right, whereas you get into the second category and it's like, okay, Tim Taylor's messing up 50% of the time, and he's kind of the laughing stock at some level. He's a loving guy, and I love his character as well, but deeply flawed. Needs constant correction. And then finally, off on the right, we get some newer shows where the father has sort of been infantilized, becomes a fool in their own household, and the wife sort of needs to compensate for that by playing both the feminine and the masculine roles, right? They have to be the nurturer and caretaker, but also be the breadwinner and the calm mind in the room, the logical direction. And so I think it's important to realize that when we're fighting for this sameness, when we're trying to flatten everything and gray everything, what gets lost, what people don't realize, the danger in that is that if everything is the same, that means nothing is special. And in traditional Christian terms, nothing is sacred. Sacred is the thing that's set apart and special, that deserves more attention, more care, more love, right? And then as a consequence, nothing justifies sacrifice. If I'm the exact same as my wife, then it'd be like sacrificing for myself, which really isn't sacrifice, right? So you have to have things that are above and things that are below, things that are more special, things that are less special, things that are uniquely beautiful, not necessarily better, but beautiful in this unique way. And so the case I'm going to make tonight is that we don't have a patriarchy problem, we don't have a feminism problem. What we have is a lack of sacrifice, leading to a lack of beauty. This is sort of the summary. This will be sort of like kind of the last slide, but I wanted to give you the big picture before we go through all the details. So we have two different worldviews here. I'm going to be using the postmodern worldview as to contrast against the ancient worldview. In the postmodern worldview, masculine and feminine are sort of these stubborn social constructs that have been used to control human behavior. So if you even say the word masculine and feminine to people, a lot of people will be immediately turned off. Because what they think that you mean by that word is, this is the way men have to be and this is the way women have to be. And that's not what I mean. And that's not what the ancient Christian worldview is. To an ancient Christian, masculine and feminine are sort of spiritual modes of being, or you can think of them as methods of ascent. If we're all ascending towards God, we're all ascending towards beauty, all ascending towards goodness, we can climb that mountain in sort of one of two ways, or all the ways that we could climb the mountain can be categorized in this polarity of masculine and feminine. Does that make sense? So, in the postmodern view, any differences in outcome between the sexes is obviously structural oppression, right? The only reason there is a difference is because there is bias. because people hate women, and so there aren't as many women in this thing, or vice versa. And then in the Christian worldview, the sexes are not deterministic, right? So male and female aren't a one-for-one graft onto masculine and feminine. The men are more masculine, the women are more feminine, but men are also feminine and women are also masculine. And so the differences between the sexes are deterministic. They aren't deterministic. You can't look at a man and say, therefore, he must act in this way. And you can't look at a woman and say, therefore, she must act in this way. But in large groups, you can predict averages, right? You can say things like men are from Mars and women are from Venus. That's okay because the differences are real and tied to real spiritual patterns. And then equality as sameness in the postmodern view versus equality equal before God, which is equal spiritual value. Not the same, but equal in spiritual value. I'll go through some more of these as we get going, but that gives you sort of a taste of the differences and how these two worldviews treat this masculine and feminine pattern. Okay, so if you are a postmodernist, you sort of look back at this history of how men and women have treated each other in the past. And what you'll say is that, this idea that the people on the top should act in a certain way and the people on the bottom should act in a certain way, this is really just an arbitrary social construct. It could have just as easily been the other way. The women could have been wearing the suits and the men could have been wearing the dresses. That's just as valid. And the women could have been the breadwinners and the men could have been the caretakers. That's just as valid. And so living in these traditional patterns, if you say men should be more masculine and women should be feminine, they immediately would say that these patterns are oppressive by definition. They're completely avoidable, and if we organize our society in a certain way, they'll just go away.
Does your woman have a beard?
Does she? It was AI image, so it could be. Where?
I think it's a shadow.
Okay.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah, I gave it an inspiration. Okay, so and then the ancient Christian view is masculine and feminine are baked into reality itself. These are cosmic spiritual principles that get reflected in the material world, and one way in which they get reflected is in men and women on earth and roles between them. And so these, assuming they're not corrupted, because they can be corrupted, right? Like people can act in corrupted masculine ways and people can act in corrupted feminine ways. But if they're not corrupted, then these patterns are inevitable, natural, and meant to be fulfilled. They're beautiful and they harmonize everything together. And dismantling them would be a complete disaster. So in the Christian view, everything's tied together. There's this idea, this thing in science called functional morphology or equal morphology, where you can look at a creature, and if you don't fully understand its environment, so say a creature from the bottom of the ocean gets washed up on the shore, you can analyze the creature and you can learn about its environment, right? So if it doesn't have eyes, then maybe it lives in a really dark environment and doesn't have any use for eyes, right? Or if you have a set of lungs in front of you, you can determine, okay, well, these lungs are filtering oxygen from other things, and therefore this creature must live in an environment where there's air, and in this air, oxygen is one of the elements which it must separate. Okay, so you can look at a creature and you can determine what its environment is, right? Because there's something connecting the creature to its environment. Similarly, that's where an ancient Christian would say that masculine and feminine come from. We don't just look at a bunch of people, say this is how they act over time, call one masculine, call one feminine, and go from there. It's starting at the very fundamental level of creation, heaven and earth, seed and soil, inhale and exhale, and then expanding that out and saying, where do we see that same pattern? right? And so we're going to build this map together. We start at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, seed, soil, inhale, exhale, pattern, matter. These two are beautifully interwoven, right? The earth sort of completes the heaven, and the heaven sort of gives the earth a reason. There would be no point in having one without the other. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." What does it mean to be created in the image of God? Well, creation reflects God, and then the creatures within creation reflect creation, and all of this is flowing from the same source. And so when we see that God creates man and creates man in our image, what we might expect to see is a part of man that would be more heavenly, and a part of humanity that would be more bodily, more earthly, right? And that's exactly what we see. We learn that humanity has a body and has a soul. And the soul orients us. It tells us what direction to go, and then the body actually does it. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Again, you have the material world being breathed into, heaven being put into this earth, and that's where the life comes from. And the Lord God fashioned the rib which he had taken from Adam into a woman and brought her to Adam. And Adam said, "Now this is the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of her man." So now we have we have one human essence. This is what our humanity is. This is our human nature. And that human nature is split into body and soul. And now we have the introduction of human persons. And these persons are split into woman and man. One that's initiatory and one that's receptive. And you can tie that to physical intercourse, or you can tie that to other psychological and spiritual components. And then next, if you guys remember, when we talked about God in the Antidote series, we said that God had an essence, one essence, three persons, and then sort of infinite energies. Energies are the way in which God operates in the world, right? So an energy of God might be love, an energy of God might be beauty, and we get to participate in those energies. And likewise, humans also have their own energies, and these are more like the things we do in the world, how we act in the world. And the pattern here repeats, where we have both a masculine pattern and a feminine pattern, a heavenly pattern and an earthly pattern, masculine and feminine, and they have this deep interrelation between each other. One initiates, one receives. One focused on judgment, the other focused on mercy. One focused on protection, the other focused on nurturing, right? And you see that they work together. They have to be beautifully harmonized, otherwise they all fall apart. And so I think it'd be really tempting here to be like, oh, the things on the top are better and the things on the top are worse. I just want to reiterate what I said earlier, which is that they complete each other. Without the other, none of them are worth anything, right? And the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone, but let us make a help for him," Ezer, Kenegdo, suitable to him. Let us make a help for him that's suitable to him. So help would imply that, like, they're doing things that you're not doing, right? If you guys had the ability to do all the same things equally well, then they wouldn't be much of a help. I guess maybe you'd get more of the same thing done, but you wouldn't be able to get anything complicated done. This term, Ezer, Kenegdo, and Pastor, if you have thoughts on this, feel free to give them at this time as well. But my understanding is basically that Ezer effectively means aligned in purpose, or rescuer, or helper, necessary partner. Might be a way to summarize this, right? They complete you. And then Kenegdo, equal opposite, completing, corresponding, complementary in strength, right? So we're working on the same project, but their strengths are not the same as your strengths, and you complement each other so that 1 + 1 = 3, right? You can go higher, you can ascend faster. And what's interesting is God is sort of laying everything out, during the creation, creates light and it is good, creates land and it is good. And then he says in these verses, when Adam is alone, it is not good. And then there's the creation of Eve, and he calls it very good. Right? So it started almost lower than the rest of creation and ended up being higher than the rest of creation.
One thing I'll point out on that, on Ezer, God refers to himself in his relationship with Israel 3 different times as Ezer, that he's the helpmate of Israel. And oftentimes when I talk to men and women concerning this idea, ladies sometimes will get upset. This, helpmate is, a lot of the English translations. They almost take that as slave, or, I'm just your secretary, I'm just your servant.
Yes, because they see it as his telos, his purpose, and she's just helping. And I don't think that that's actually said here.
Once you point out that this is actually a word that God refers to himself, it begins to change things for him. Yeah.
Well said. Absolutely. Yeah, if a helper is something that God's calling himself in relationship to us, then we should probably not assume that means that it's lesser.
Right.
Yeah. So, going back to sort of this mountain metaphor that I lean on, again, masculine and feminine are these modes of being. You can be a certain way, a man can be a certain way, and a woman can be a certain way, and the way that we're being is either masculine or feminine. And so men are sort of mostly masculine, but also feminine, and women are mostly feminine, but also masculine, critically. And you wouldn't want a man that doesn't have feminine qualities, and you wouldn't want a woman that doesn't have masculine qualities. So each individual human being participates in both of these modes, but not equally. And this is the reason that we can't talk about any of this stuff like outside of a room like this, because it's nuanced, it's complicated, it takes more than a sentence. You can't put it on a bumper sticker, right? So characters like Andy Taylor that we brought up before, he wasn't a good character, he wasn't a good man, he wasn't a good dad just because he, maintained the rules and took care of the bad guys. He had many beautiful feminine characteristics as well, and cared for Opie. And part of that's kind of a side story here, but he also had lost his wife, so he was a single father, which is kind of an interesting thing as well. So we have sort of this right hand. You can think of as sort of, and when I say right hand, I'm like talking about from God's perspective to the right, and from the screen's perspective, more masculine to the right, more feminine to the left. And within just men, now if I'm focusing on just men, you can see how sort of different characters through pop culture or through real world politics, etc., might fall onto this ideal man chart, right? So we have Ron Swanson down at the bottom, who is very masculine, but maybe to a detriment, right? Maybe he doesn't care enough about the people around him. I love that character and I relate to him a lot. But he's not the ideal man, right? And then on the other side, you have Ross Geller, who's just super feminine, way too worried about what everybody else thinks of him. He can't get out of his own way. He's sort of lost in this emotionalism, right? And then as we ascend, you can see more beautiful manifestations of this pattern, where you have legitimate masculine figures like Abraham Lincoln, legitimate, more feminine leading masculine figures like Fred Rogers. Most people love both of these characters, even though one leans toward the masculine and one leans toward the feminine. These are both good men. And as we move up the triangle, we get this more perfect integration, where the masculine is fully realized and it's balanced perfectly with the feminine. And one thing that I really like about this image is that in order to be at the summit, Aragorn here is looking down. And that's because he's not just playing this masculine role, he's playing a sacrificial masculine role. He's not here for his own glory. He's here for all the people under him, right? And so, and then you also notice that he's got a woman next to him. He's got Erwin next to him. He's not complete, nor can he be at the summit, nor can he be the full man that he's meant to be without his Ezer Kenegdo. And then you can apply this same concept here to the female side, right? You have very masculine men, Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada, kicking ass, taking names, owning businesses, right? And then you got Padme Amidala on the other side, which isn't... The other thing you have to remember is, like, not... People don't just, like, fit perfectly into these categories, right? Like, Padme, for those of you who are Star Wars nerds like I am, had a lot of masculine qualities. She, told the truth, got in front of people, did the hard thing, even, physical fighting and stuff like that. But her flaw, her fatal flaw as a character, was that, her husband was becoming Darth Vader, and she didn't do anything about it. She was so loving, so empathetic, so caring, so nurturing, that she just assumed the best and let it go, right? So it turns into a tragedy, even though she's a very competent, capable character. And as you move up, you have, again, it's hard with politicians because everybody hates it, but maybe you have a, legitimate, more masculine female character here, Condoleezza Rice, and a more feminine Princess Diana. And then at the top, again, we have Erwin, who is sacrificial in some key way and isn't complete without her partner. Okay, so I want to leave the poetry here for a second and dive into some statistics. I think a lot of people are allergic to even saying things like men blank, women blank. And the response is, well, I know a woman who isn't like that, right? Or, I know a man who, stays at home with the kids and watches. So there are individual humans, individual persons, and then there are groups of persons, right? And the way in statistics that you deal with groups is that you put them on this bell curve. And so if we take all the men in the world and we put them in this bell curve, and it's rating them on a scale of aggressiveness, you're going to have 50% of the men in the middle, and then you're going to have descending bell curves on each side, and you're going to have some people that are really, really aggressive on one tail, and you're going to have people that are very not aggressive on the other tail, right? So we have these bell curves that creates this displays natural distribution of large groups of people. And then you get sort of different shapes. If there's a lot of people bunched in the middle, there's little variation, then you get a steeper curve. And if you get a lot of variation, it's a flatter curve. And then you get the mean average in the middle and the curved tail. Sorry for taking you through a mathematics lesson here. You get the tails at the end. Again, these are the extremes. And then you can do group comparisons by putting these two bell curves together. Right? So again, and what you'll find, if you do these studies, if you look at the studies that are actually out there on men versus women, the first thing to notice is that men and women are more similar than different, right? And this is the human essence, the humanity that we all share. At the end of the day, that's your core identity, is your humanity. And we share far more in common with the ladies who aren't in this room right now than we have differences. But the differences matter, and they're important. And even when you have two bell curves like this where there's a tremendous amount of overlap, it's really important to realize that at the extremes, so there's some things we might measure where there would be significant differences, where there isn't a lot of overlap. But even in the instances where there is a very significant overlap, where they're 99% the same, what you see is at the very edge of the tails, there's big differences, okay? So for example, interest in people over things. That's one of the things that psychologists measure. Are these people more interested in stuff, money and cars and trucks and engineering and all this kind of stuff, or are they more interested in people? And this is why most nurses are women. Because women always score higher on interest in people over things. There's a tremendous amount of overlap, But at the edges, at the tails, nobody goes into nursing unless they really care about people, right? No, because that is a hard job, wiping butts and taking blood and cleaning up puke. You got to really care about people to do that job, right? And so the only people who go into nursing are the people who are on the tails. And almost all the people who are on the tails of liking people more than things are almost all women. And that's why you don't see many nurses that are men. Now, are there social dynamics that are enhancing that? Absolutely. If you get a group of 95% women and a man tries to enter, it's going to be a little awkward, right? So, and some of that is, needs to be addressed and fixed, and we can optimize it, but some of it's just natural too. It's just going to happen. And on the opposite side of that, interest in things over people, you have the same tail on the other side, and this explains why more men are engineers than women. Is it because women are less intelligent? No, it's because of this interest. And so, I forgot what I was going to say there. But what you find, and there are studies out there that look at like the most egalitarian societies where all these barriers have been broken down, where they've incentivized women to go into traditionally male occupations, incentivized men to go in traditionally female occupations, and what you see is it ends up getting more extreme. So you're not able to just put your fingers on the scale and transform society in the way that you think you could. And then last here, aggressiveness. You can imagine a bell curve where you have a tremendous amount of overlap in aggressiveness. There are very aggressive females and there are very aggressive males. But all of the most aggressive people are males, almost all, right? And so because that tail extends further to the right, what you get is most CEOs are men and most inmates are men, right? Because you have to be a little crazy to do either one of those jobs, right? And again, is there oppression there? Like, are females being kept out of the C-suite? Absolutely, sure, that absolutely happens. But it's also not the only reason. You can't say if there isn't a 50-50 distribution of men and women in C-suites that it's because there's structural oppression baked into the system. It just doesn't work that way. It ignores all differences between men and women, which we know for scientific fact are wrong, and we know from a spiritual level are wrong as well. So, all right, let's try to sort of like triangulate, so how should we think about this as Christians? There are two biological sexes, male and female, that share a humanity, a basic humanity. There are two spiritual modes of masculine and feminine. And men and women both have access to those patterns and participate in both of those patterns every day. Sex differences are predictable. We should expect there to be more nurses that are women and engineers that are men, but it's not deterministic. You can't look at a woman and say she can't be an engineer, or a man and say they can't be a nurse. They absolutely can, but it is predictable that they won't be. And then in marriage, you have to realize that marriage is a very particular thing, meant for a very particular goal, and so although there is flexibility, right? You can have a man that is with a very masculine wife, and a wife who's with a very feminine husband, but the roles are not necessarily interchangeable, and we'll talk about why here in a bit. And that these aren't just social constructs; these are cosmic polarities, cosmic principles. That if they're balanced appropriately and handled appropriately, it can be beautiful and harmonious. Okay. And then also, I think it's important here to point out that, again, that in both of our summit images here, they both contained their partner. And so you can go so high in your own sort of male summit here, and you can go so high in your female summit, but you can't go as high as you can if you're partnered ideally together. Okay. So this brings us to the hard stuff. Why Eve? Why is it that Eve listened to the serpent and not Adam? And this has been a point of a lot of consternation over the years, and it's been abused by a tremendous amount of abusive people trying to say things like women are inferior to men and so on and so forth. And now you have a lot of modern Christians that say, well, it's just arbitrary. The snake, the serpent could have just as easily targeted Adam instead of Eve. And what I'd like to offer you tonight is a much more nuanced version of it, where we try to understand why it's not arbitrary. I love this image because the snake isn't just talking to Eve. Well, first of all, he's got a human head, which is great. But I love the fact that the snake is like coiled around Eve's legs as well. And so we'll get into that symbolism here in the next couple slides. The first thing I want to point out here is that what I'm going to be advocating for here has nothing to do, again, and I apologize, this is just a bunch of caveats that I have to keep giving so that because this is so outside of our normal culture, I'm going to keep giving these caveats so you don't think I'm trying to undermine people or diminish anybody's influence. So the big story tonight that I'm making is that we ascend together, right? That we ascend the mountain of the Lord, and that we need each other. And if we're alone, we need to utilize both masculine and feminine patterns. And if we're together, we need to lean into our masculine patterns so that our partner can lean into their feminine patterns. And together they harmonize upward. Okay, this is going to be quite complicated, but I think it's really rewarding. And I've given you all printouts so you can take it home and look at it more deeply, because it does take some time. What I've done in these diagrams, and I think I haven't seen anything exactly like this out there, so I think it's kind of eye-opening in a lot of different ways. But what I've done is I've put a sort of transcendent principle at the top of the mountain. This is, bringing us up towards God. This is an element of God. This is an energy of God, righteous judgment in this case, right? And then I have the mountain, and the mountain has a right side and a left side. It has a masculine and a feminine side. And you see the arrows going upward, but they're also going inward. They're joining at the summit, right? So the ascent happens by the merging of these two polarities. And then as you go down, the masculine begins to fall apart and the feminine begins to fall apart. I'm calling this disintegration or selfish disintegration. They're not just going down, but they're going out. They're going away from each other. And so the feminine disintegration is effectively feminine without the masculine to balance it, if that makes sense, right? So let me just give an example here. So this is judgment. And if you think about any good judge, right? Say you get falsely accused of something and you go into court and you got the judge in front of you. What are you hoping that judge is? You're hoping that they're just. You want them to, like if you did it, you want them to bust people. But maybe you also want them to be merciful. You definitely want them to be wise, but you want them to be just, but you also want them to be merciful, meaning maybe they take the situation into account as to what happened, right? Maybe you had to kill a guy, but he was stabbing you in the throat at the time, right? That's an important detail and should probably have some be reflected in his judgment, right? So there's judgment and there's mercy, and these are sort of the two components of what good judgment is, of what righteous judgment is. So the masculine side of this would be the judgment side. This would be prioritizing rules over relationships, maintaining standards. In the Orthodox Church, it's often called akriva, and it's elevating the truth, elevating the exemplars, putting the rules first. This is how it should be. This is what you should do. This is what's expected of you, right? And it's necessarily exclusive. We've been talking a lot about, in modern society, inclusiveness, but nobody ever brings up that we need to balance that with exclusiveness. Why would we need exclusiveness? Imagine we're all going out and we're playing a bunch of flag football together, right? And we do it a couple Sundays and we have great flag football games, and all of a sudden The next weekend I show up and I got a tuba. And I was like, well, I just figured, we could use a little music while we play. And you guys would be like, well, okay. All right, yeah, you play your tuba, we'll play football. And the football game goes on. But if next week Dane and Jacob show up with instruments too, and at some point, if enough people bring instruments and start playing music, then we're not a football team anymore. We're a band, right? That's exclusivity, right? It's not better or worse than inclusivity. They're both important, they're both necessary, and there's a right time for each, right? So the right, it's funny because the judgment is actually the right side and the mercy is the left side, and I got everything presented from God's point of view, sort of, rather than my own. So the mercy here, which is the left hand, is mercy, and this is the feminine. And the feminine prioritizes relationships and people over rules. I don't know if you guys have ever played board games with your wife or girlfriend, but do they ever say something like, let's just forget about that rule for now. We don't need to worry about that. Especially if you have kids, just let the kids play. And then I immediately grab my head like, what are you talking about? If there's no rules, then what are we doing here? And it's not going to be more fun. It's going to be less fun because there's no winning. And does that sound familiar to you guys? Okay. What was that? Not very nice. Yeah. I ran all this through my wife and eldest daughter, just so you know. So you have the masculine judgment on one side, and then you have the feminine mercy on the other. And the feminine mercy is empathizing with the exceptions, the margins. They're having trouble playing, so let's reduce the rules so that they can be included, right? Care for the marginalized. This is inclusion. And both of these are really important, right? So if we're playing like a really complicated game of Monopoly, and one of my kids doesn't understand the rules, or it's taken too long, and I'm just like, screw you, building a hotel. That's not good either, right? So you have to find this balance between judgment and mercy. And so what happens, so as they come together, you can see how those two can be combined into righteous judgment. This is what judgment should look like. It should be fully set in the standards, but it should also be merciful and reflect the people actually involved, right? But when it falls apart, if the masculine sort of goes off on its own and it says there are no exceptions, these are the rules, that sort of gives you this cold judgment. It gives you, yeah, you're right, but you're being kind of a dick. You're being cruel, right? And then, in this situation, you sort of get rid of all the exceptions. Like, oh, sorry, the little Briar can't figure out how to buy a hotel. Go away, you can't play the game. Okay? We get rid of the exceptions. They can't be included. And you get sort of this tyrannical father type character. And on the opposite side, if you dismiss the value of judgment or you dismiss the value of rules, then you end up in this coddling, enabling situation. They can do whatever they want. Just let them color on the game board. That they really want to color, right? And then, so they're wrong, but they're being really nice about it. And this would be called sort of a devouring mother type situation. You're probably wondering, these are all great ideas, but is this biblical? Like, is this Christian? Where's all this stuff coming from? And so here's just a couple of quick examples. What we're really doing here is we're tying hundreds and hundreds of biblical stories, parables together to try to identify patterns. And so just to prove out the system, a good example of masculine judgment, so proper judgment, would be the Pharisees maintaining the Sabbath and keeping it holy. Everybody sees the Pharisees as just like, totally bad, evil, and they were flawed, and Christ took them to task, but he didn't take them to task for being Pharisees. He took them to task for being hypocrites, which we're going to get to down here. Okay, masculine tyranny. Here are the rules, and we're going to take the rules so far that you actually lose the spirit in which the rule was set. The whole rule of the Sabbath was to give glory to God, and you're not giving much glory to God if you're not letting people be healed on the Sabbath, right? So you can see how this masculine can be this really authentic, generative thing, and you can see how it can fall apart into tyranny. And then on the other side, feminine mercy. A good story of mercy is the Good Samaritan coming by the injured man and helping them. It wasn't the Pharisee, it wasn't the good Jew that helped the guy in the ditch, it was the dirty Samaritan that did it, right? This is the feminine mercy. But where that can go wrong, if there's mercy, if there's empathy, if there's caring and nurturing and inclusion, but there's no discernment, no judgment, then you get Eve listening to the serpent. It's not arbitrary that Eve listened to the serpent and Adam did not, because she is the representation of the feminine. And the feminine is prone to giving an ear to the dispossessed, to the margins, to the oppressed. St. Ephraim the Syrian, the serpent sowed its counsel in Eve, and she conceived death. Right? She was the vector through which the serpent had his influence. The serpent could have just as easily, I think, found a vector through Adam. He's no more or less flawed than Eve is. But the particular way in which he went after them to get an open ear was to go through the more empathetic of the two. I think it's the most beautiful interpretation I've heard of it. And then what I did here is I tried to give some real-world examples. So we have righteous judgment in the middle. This is the goal. And then we have authentic masculine, proper masculine and proper feminine to the right and left. And then we have the disintegrated masculine and feminine to the far side. So a good example would be like the game. So ideally we'd have a fair game. We would award excellence, like the best person would get the biggest trophy. But everybody would be recognized for participating, right? And the two pieces that come together in order to reach that would be the masculine, which just says, here are the rules, this is how it's going to be, we're going to have a competent referee, and there's going to be one victor. That's the masculine component of the transcendent righteous judgment. The feminine side would be, well, we don't want to just reward the person who got first, but also the person who second did good. How about a silver medal for them? Third, also really impressive. A bronze, yes, and we should praise everyone. All true, right? But missing something critical, which is prioritizing the single victor, rules, etc. And only when they come together do you reach this higher part. And then you can see how they fall off the one end. If the masculine is all worried about the best is best and the exceptions don't matter and all this, you can sort of see how that might go into like winner worship, right? Like you care about Michael Jordan, but none of the other Bulls matter, right? Scottie Pippen, get off the stage. Sorry, I've got a lot of 90s references tonight. Elijah's over there like, what? Or bedtime, right? So the masculine thrust would be, I expect you in bed by 9 o'clock. And the feminine would be, it's a special night. They had friends over, let's let them stay up and have a fun time. Those are both right, but they have to be balanced together, right? So we can have peaceful bedtime rituals, standards, bedtimes that we hold people to, but then we also have to make room for these special exceptions. And then if you fall all the way off on the feminine, then it's like, yeah, go to bed whenever you want. Doesn't matter. I just want you to be happy. Or all the way to the disintegrated masculine, like, I will choke you out if you're not in bed by 9 o'clock, right? Okay, that's a problem. Right, so does that pattern make sense to everyone? Does that sort of reflect things that you see in your own life? Okay. I got 3 of these, 3 models. The first one was righteous judgment, and the next one is life and peace. I want to again remind you that off here on the left, I have as you move up, you're getting more union, more love, more sacrifice. Each side has to give up something to the other side in order for them to be harmonized. I also think it's important to point out that that doesn't mean that they're 50-50. Right? So if we go back to this last example, you start with solid rules. These are the rules of the game. This is what the game is. This is how it works. This is what the players do, and this is how you score a point. That's the inhale. That's the first breath. That's the initiation, and that's 80% of the whole thing. But you have to make room for the other 20%. You have to, the exhale, the final breath, is the mercy. Right? So it's not about this 50-50 gray. It's about each one in balance. It's the first thrust and the exhale. It's the inhale and the exhale. Okay, next pattern is life and peace. So how do we ascend toward life and peace? We have the masculine side here, which is protection or guarding. So external authority guards the boundaries and offers provision to keep, and this is when God put man in the garden, he charged them to keep, to tend and keep the garden. Okay, keep here is shamar, and that's on the masculine side, and tend, abad, is on the other side. I don't know if I pronounced those right, but so we have the masculine protecting, guarding, setting boundaries, and provisioning and keeping the conditions for life secure, right? And then on the feminine side, you have sustaining what's inside, taking what's been set inside the boundaries, taking what's been provided, taking what's been provisioned, and turning it into fruit, multiplying it, right? So you can think about the masculine offers the groceries, the feminine makes a meal. The masculine offers a house, the feminine turns it into a home. So these are the two legitimate generative masculine and feminine patterns. You can think of it also like a walled garden, right? There's a wall around the garden that keeps all the predators out, that establishes the area which should be cultivated and not cultivated. There is a place for bugs and varmints and stuff, but it's outside the wall, not inside. And then you have when it all falls apart. You have when they disintegrate into selfishness. The masculine thinks it doesn't need all this nurturing. It can just, it's enough to be masculine and guarding and protecting, but there's nothing to protect. So you end up, so if there's no nurturing, it ends up being oppressive. You resort to intimidation and violence, and growth stagnates, life ends, resources get wasted. You hear all the resources, and then there's nothing to do with them, right? It's the bachelor with the big bank account. Of what use is that money, right? And then you have the feminine collapse. If the masculine is providing protection and the feminine needs that protection in order to do nurturing, if the protection disappears, then threats enter, people get victimized, disorder spreads, resources get exhausted. So, why is it that, it's women that get beat up and men not so much, get abused by their spouses and stuff? Because they are different in nature. Because men are more physically capable, first of all, and more violent and more aggressive, and play this protective role. And if the protective role is corrupt in some way, then now the female has nothing left to protect. All they have is the ability to nurture. And so that's when people get victimized, right? It's not some social construct, and if we could just train men to be a little nicer and train women to be a little bit less victim-y, that this would end. It's baked into the reality. And this is, if you want to know why is it that men need to protect, because when they don't, we get victims. And why is it that women need to nurture? Because when we don't, we end up with oppression and bank accounts with nothing valuable to spend it on. That's why. So we're sort of ascending upward, we're running towards something, and we're running away from what's down below as well. So again, the beauty comes from the union of the two. Protection creates the space so that cultivation, nurturing can produce life. And you can see this pattern in, Jacob's about ready to have a new daughter anytime soon. And I can, without knowing anything about him and without knowing anything about his wife, I can tell you that she's probably spending a lot more time nesting and preparing to nurture, and he's probably spending more time figuring out how the hell am I going to pay for this thing and keep it safe. And they both do both, but he's going to worry more about those things and she's going to more worry about the others. Okay, biblical connections. We have masculine protection here, like Joseph ordering the 1/5 of grain to be stored, preparing for the famine in Genesis. This is a legitimate effort to protect the people from famine. And you have Christ, the feminine nurturing side. You have Christ washing the feet of the apostles. Do they deserve to have their feet washed? Right? No, but they get his love and care regardless. Right? So that care, that mercy, that nurturing, that is good. And then you have the masculine falling apart, Pharaoh enslaving the Israelites. This is the crushing control. This is the oppression. And then this one I really like. I just thought of this today, actually, and I went in and I changed this. On the exposure collapse. So if you don't have the protection, it's Adam's failure to keep the garden that resulted in the serpent even having an opportunity to have Eve's ear. I had never thought of that, and I was like, oh my gosh. If she's tending the garden and he's keeping the garden, and a predator got in and had access to one of them, it's because he failed to keep. Right? So you can see how a failure to do proper masculine protection results in collapse on the feminine. Does that make sense? I will greatly multiply. Okay, so then at the fall, you can sort of see that they're doing the same thing after the fall. Their expectations are the same, but the way in which it gets done is drastically different, right? So God says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and conception, and pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Right? So she's still involved in nurturing, still involved in caretaking, still involved in this cultivation process. Child keeping is this new version. But he shall rule over you. Right? So that goes back to you're trying to do this nurturing. But if he fails to do his thing, then this all falls apart. Sorry, this is hard to explain. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, saying you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat of the herb of the field. All right, so you're still working in the garden, but now it's by toil, it's by the sweat of your face, and you shall eat the bread until you yourself return to the ground. Right, so the sort of like the fundamental work that they were doing in the garden, they're still doing. It's just that it now comes with this pain and suffering and death. And we talked about in the original Anados series that this was not punishment, that that's not the best way to think about it, but rather purpose. Because through this pain, through this suffering, through our death, this is how we can repent and move back towards God. Right? There's a reason that people find God on their deathbed, and it's not because it's convenient. It's because it's true, and you can't see the truth until the veils of pride have been pulled from your face. Okay, so real-world examples of this life and peace pattern. So you could have a providing and protective father and a nurturing mother, but only together can you get this sort of secure, ordered, loving home. And another example here, immigration. Okay, the second one down, the current topic. So you have the legitimate feminine here, which is say, hey, we need to appreciate other cultures. Ours isn't just epically awesome and the rest of them are evil and dangerous, and we need to appreciate the fact that the other cultures have good things and we could learn from them. And, I think it would be good for us to have robust immigration because our population's going down and blah, 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 blah. There's all sorts of legitimate truth in this feminine nurturing stance. And on the other side, you have the masculine saying we need to have defined borders to keep everybody safe. We need to have discernment in our cultures. They're not all equal. And we need to have limited immigration because every immigrant creates more danger, more risk, right? And then they come together by saying, like, you have to have strong borders. You have to have a legitimate country. But you need to have manageable immigration where you can appropriately assimilate people into the system. But not just for the purpose of making them like you, but also in hoping that you can gain something from them. Right? So we can ascend our culture by bringing people in who can add to it. We're going to assimilate them into our system and help them live like us, but hopefully we can get something in exchange. And then, goes all the way to the feminine side. You get open borders, cultural relativism. There's no difference between this group and that group and this way of thinking, and, and resources depleted, right? There's only so many resources that can be spent. And then on the masculine side, you get dehumanizing. These people are subspecies. These are outsiders. All immigration should be outlawed. Enforcement raids, etc. Right? So both of these can go too far, and only together, when they ascend upward, can they be closer to God. I know this is dense. I only got one more here. The last pattern is beauty. So how do we ascend together in beauty? And this is where the word headship comes in. So we have, in every relationship, there needs to be sort of the head and the body, right? In order to go through the world, you have to think, and you have to actually do. And the thinking, the headship, the knowledge, the understanding, the logos, the orientation of the mind is masculine, and feminine is the reception of that knowledge and understanding and the embodiment of it, which would historically be called wisdom. So when we think of wisdom, we usually just think of like how all the dots connect and like what direction we should go. But biblical wisdom is you start with knowledge, then you go to understanding, which is sort of like our modern way of saying wisdom. Understanding is like knowing how all the dots are connected. Wisdom is actually doing it, right? So my dad is very wise when it comes to managing cattle. But could he write a book about it? Does he have all the like detailed knowledge, the ability to like document all the? Probably not. But he's super wise at it, right? So that's feminine embodiment. Okay. So you have the truth, and then you have the integration of that truth. And only when they work together, when the head is oriented properly upward, and the body is listening to the head and following it upward, can you actually have the ascent. The head orients us up, and the body takes us there. So there's orienting and then integrating or embodying. And then when that falls apart, if there is no feminine embodiment, if you just have all these ideas, but nothing ever happens, we call that, being sterile or ineffectual. A lot of entrepreneurs will say, ideas are a dime a dozen, like the value's in the doing. Everybody's got ideas. The difference between success and not success is they actually get it done. So again, one's not better than the other. Both are necessary, and both 1 + 1 = 3. Some of these are kind of complicated. I won't get into this. Naming is control. Naming is justification. These are interesting, but beyond our work tonight. So yeah, it's like you're right, but you're sterile. Like your idea is going nowhere. And then on the feminine side, you have the opposite problem where there is, we're getting a lot accomplished. We're doing lots of things, but it's not the right stuff. We have no discernment, no direction, no understanding of how things should tie together, but we're very skillfully getting a tremendous amount of the wrong thing done. I had several employees like this, and they at some point they were like the most valuable employees ever because they were getting so much done. But then, when it got to be a slightly more challenging tasks or whatever, all of a sudden it was like, oh, you just wrote a 30-page paper about complete nonsense in the wrong direction, the total opposite direction of the way I think we should go. That's not good.
Can I ask, as an entrepreneur, when it comes to beauty or order, where do you fall? Do you fall more in the masculine, or do you fall more in the feminine?
For me personally, for our company, I was the CEO, and Jessica was the president once we got a larger size. And her role is very, very masculine. First of all, leadership, having to hire and fire people, having to make hard decisions, having to decide, are we going to spend here or spend there, put this person on the project or take them off. So there's a lot of masculine work happening there. But in terms of the way she related to me, it was very feminine. All right, so my role as the CEO was to establish the vision. This is where we're going. This is the direction. And you have to understand that I'm not doing that in a vacuum, right? In order to make a decision, I'm getting her opinion. I'm getting all the directors' opinions. I'm bringing all that in, having hard conversations with each of them, pushing back. They're pushing back. And then hopefully you get to the end and you come to a consensus. But if you can't, then the CEO has to make a decision and move forward. And so my role was very much more visionary, and her role was making that vision actually happen.
Okay, so she embodied
Yep.
what you put out there, okay?
Yep.
Do you find, with the way that your mind works, do you find one easier for you than the other?
I find one impossible.
Okay, the embodiment.
Yeah.
I'm the same way.
Oh no, and it's at some level it's a complete character flaw.
Sure.
It's like I would be a better person if I could get to embodiment easier sometimes. But then everything has trade-offs. Right? I don't think you get to just be better at embodying and then maintain all the other skill sets. And so what I always tell people, what I always noticed is that I could identify the superpower in every employee. Like, you are great at this. And what was really interesting is once you identified somebody's superpower, you could immediately translate that into a weakness. Because you are great at this, you will almost certainly be really bad at this. Or have a natural proclivity against it, right? So you have a natural tendency in this direction, which means you're not naturally tending in this direction. And that doesn't mean you can't be good at that. What it means is that you have to acknowledge it. You have to make a plan to change it. You have to develop systems or processes to overcome it. Or you have to partner with the right person to make it happen. So I think a lot of successful businesses have two founders. Steve and Steve of Apple.
Disney.
Yep.
Walt did he had the idea drawer, and then his partner would come in and pick through the ideas that could actually be embodied.
Okay.
And that was his job, was just to throw things into the idea drawer, and then the other guy's job was to make them happen.
So Walt was Steve Jobs, and this guy was Wozniak.
Yeah.
Yeah. You see that everywhere, right? So there's a head and there's a body. And if you think about it, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, but this is how any relationship is. If you have a good relationship with somebody, there's usually a head and there's a body. Not always, but if there's two heads, then you're going in opposite directions, right? I think we should do this. Well, I think we should do that. And so you need people that are more receptive and wanting to follow, and other people that are ready to take the reins. Okay, biblical examples here. We have the masculine headship, Adam naming the animals. Naming the animals is ordering. right? Your name is this, not that. This is how this animal is going to relate to this animal in this way. And so this is the process of categorizing and bringing to order. Feminine embodiment. This would be the Theotokos saying to the angel of the Lord, let it be. Let it be according to your will, not mine, and bearing Christ despite the risk. This, by the way, is why, in the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, they make such a big deal out of Mary, because it's basically the highest possible form of feminine embodiment, right? To take God into your body and embody God himself. And so, and it's also a good opportunity to point out that, actually I'll save that I got another slide here coming up, but, and so then where does that go wrong? It goes wrong with, if we don't have this embodiment, then we just have ideas alone, right? So Pilate had an idea that there's no fault in Christ. I can't find a fault, but he didn't embody that. He just killed him, right? So a disconnect between what the correct idea was and actually following through and embodying it. And then on the opposite side, if we have this embodiment and this care, but it gets misdirected, right? It's not oriented properly. You really, really care, but about all the wrong stuff. Christ rebuking Peter for wanting to save him from the cross. Oh no, not you, Lord. You can't go die on the cross. Get away from me, Satan, because he's undercutting the entire mission that Christ was here for, right? And he was doing it for all the right reasons. He just didn't want Jesus to die. But it's not enough to be doing something for the right reasons. If you're doing the wrong things, you're doing the wrong things. And then, the Logos is an extremely complicated concept, but the highest form of this is sort of Christ incarnating into the world. The Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. The Logos is associated with the head and the Sophia with the body. And these aren't equally balanced or anything like that, but it's the incarnation is the merging of the head and the body. Then Mary said, behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word, and the angel departed from her. So this is the relationship. It's important to realize that we all play different roles, and I'm getting to that slide here pretty quick. But right now, I'm playing a headship role in this room. Everybody's attention is on me. And hope to God some of you will leave and embody some of the things that I said tonight, right? But I have a feminine relationship with God. I'm receiving downward. He offers, I receive, and try to embody. Trying to do what God wants me to do. And so I am a male, and in my marriage I play a masculine role. But when I am listening to God, I'm in a feminine role. And if I go to Pastor Steve's church and I'm working on a project for Pastor Steve, I will be in a feminine position there to listen to him and try to help him accomplish his goal. And that's cool. That's not the exclusive right to females. Okay. So then what does this look like in the actual world? What does it look like to move towards beauty in our everyday life? I think theology is a really good way of thinking about this. So a disintegrated masculine would just be doctrine only. Somebody who's just, I'm really into theology and I got all the right answers and I've done all the research and boy, let me tell you what, I can tell you all about the essence and the energies and what St. Ephrem said about this. At the end of the day, if it doesn't change you, it's just intellectual masturbation, right? You're just there alone, producing nothing. And then on the other side, you have all the receptivity, all of the openness, all of the care and embodiment. And you're doing yoga crystals and saying I'm spiritual but not religious, right? The way in which I'm religious doesn't really matter, but I'm just very spiritual, you see. Right? So they're very good at embodying it. They're actually getting in there with the crystals and doing something. But they're doing all the wrong stuff, and they're probably praying to demons. Okay, that's a problem, right? And so how does this come together? Well, masculine would be properly oriented theology, right? Something that's consistent with history, something that you didn't invent yesterday, something that's grounded in Scripture. And the feminine is actually living that life out, living a prayerful life, living a participatory life, a sacrificial life, out there actually living like a Christian, right? And then the beauty where they come together is in the middle, right? Embodied right theology. This is why Orthodox Christians, you see us, if you ever go to an Orthodox service, you'll see us going like this a whole bunch of times. When we do that, we have the identity of God on our hands, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit coming together in one God, and then two natures of Christ, fully God, fully man. So we're saying this is who God is, right? And this is how it affects me in this cruciform way, and I'm living the life in this cruciform way, reflecting God, etc., etc. And what they're trying to do is right theology, embodied, physicalized. Another example would be like how you build your home, right? Like you could build a really comfy house that just blows over in the storm. That would be way too far in the feminine. And then you could have a blueprint, super well architected blueprint that sits in a drawer and never gets built. That would be all idea, no embodiment. And then in the middle, you get this beautiful, beautiful home that's comfortable and adds life to the people within it that won't blow over in the storm. Okay, that was the hard part, guys. Sorry, that was really dense, and I hope you'll go home and look at those slides a little bit more and just study them and try to apply them to your own life. But I think this parable here of the parable of the sower, I want to read this to you, and I want you to think through everything we just went through and see if you read it differently than you would have yesterday. Okay? Consider the sower who went out to sow. And he sowed. As he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seed fell on the rocky ground, where it did not have much soil. And it grew up quickly, since the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it was scorched. And since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns came up and choked it. Still other seed fell on good ground and produced fruit. Some 100, some 60, some 30 times what was sown. Let anyone who has ears listen. So, for me, when I read this, I could see like where I could apply this like at 5 different levels, right? So, for instance, think about it in choosing a wife, right? If you plant your seed on soil that's too firm and not receptive, bullheaded and has their own direction and is not going to listen to a single word you say, then as soon as the sun comes out, the seed will be scorched, right? If you, I think the seed that's with the thorns usually represent like multiplicity, like lots of pieces. It'd be like maybe having many wives, right? But they end up choking out the seed that would have come, right? But only if you plant your seed in receptive soil, deep, rich, black, nutrient-rich, moist soil, will you actually see thriving life come, right? So you could apply this to how you choose your spouse. You can, the way in which you and your spouse, how you treat each other. But the point is that it doesn't matter how good the seed is, if it doesn't have good soil, there will be no fruit, right? And bare soil, even if it's perfect soil without seed, also bears no fruit. When you start to get into this like patterned way of thinking, when you read parables like this, you're just like, oh crap, you could apply this at 100 different levels, and I think that's how you know it's true. Because it's true if you look at it like this, and true if you look at it like this. This isn't a technical description on how to plant seed, right? But anyway, moving on. Okay, so we have this polarity. We have this masculine and feminine polarity. I think it's really important to point out that, like, this is not something that's just like Christian. Like, this is in every faith. This polarity shows up everywhere. But the way in which these different faiths resolve the polarity is really different, right? So if you're a Taoist, then what you want to do is maintain that polarity. You want to keep the polarity because the polarity is really useful. And so you want to keep it in balance. And that's what we should do. And there's an element of truth there, right? But if you're Gnostic, then you want to sort of resolve or dissolve these differences. You know, the material world is evil. It's only what's in the head that's good. And all these material differences and stuff need to be dissolved and destroyed. We need to, you know, there's the god of Hermaphrodites in Greek, in pagan culture. The ideal there is, like, how can we bring these two together into one superior being? And Christianity has a beautiful and true way of resolving these differences, which is that they only reach their ideal form when they're beautifully united together through sacrifice in this cruciform way. One has to sacrifice to the other and vice versa. So through this sacrificial love, the whole becomes worth more than the parts. And so you have the unity, but you also maintain the multiplicity, right? So the masculine still exists, the feminine still exists, the individual human being still exists, but they eventually unite to God in one. And so you have both unity and multiplicity, which I think is beautiful and true. Okay, roles. Roles are, we all play roles, and the roles that we play are relational by definition. And we all play multiple roles. So this is like what I'm trying to show here is that, so these are just some specific roles that I laid out. I went from God himself all the way down to some child and a family. And what I'm trying to show here is that each level, so let's use the priest level here, the priest has a feminine relationship with the bishop. And the priest has a masculine relationship with the faithful, right? So the bishop is providing to the priest, providing direction, providing priorities, providing resources, and the priest is hoping to put those resources and knowledge to use in his church to embody the bishop's wishes. And then inside the church, the priest is providing for the parishioners, providing for the congregation, giving them direction, giving them guidance, and they're attempting to embody and reflect the wisdom that he shares down, right? And so you have each person is playing either masculine or feminine in various different situations. And you might say, well, you have the masculine on the top and the feminine on the bottom. Does that mean that there can't be a female in the masculine role and there can't be a male in the feminine role? No, that's not the case at all. So in this example, you have a female boss and you have a male employee, and in that relationship, the boss is expected to initiate projects. The boss is expected to sacrifice to make sure that the employee has every single thing that they need in order to do the job. They're going to provide and make sure that the lights are on and the electricity is going and the payroll's running, and et cetera, et cetera. And for those of you who've never been the boss of any organization or whatever, it feels sacrificial. Like, if you're trying to do a good job, at least that was my experience, going into it, you're like, well, I'm just going to be in charge. I'm going to tell people what to do, and they're going to do that thing. And what it ends up being is very much more like being a father, where it's like I'm here for you. I'm here to die for you. You tell me what you need, because if you don't have what you need, this whole thing's going to fall apart and I'm going to be left holding the bag. And so you stay, you get there early and you stay long. And if somebody texts you at 10 o'clock at night, you text them back. And, and that's just, to be a good leader, it's very sacrificial. And then in this instance, the male employee is responding to that initiation. They're supporting, attempting to, cultivate what has been sacrificed and provided, and embody that vision. All right, we're ending with a banger here. The big word, the big S word, submission. Ephesians 5:22 through 33. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of the body. So what we need to point out here is that this is a commentary on marriage. This is not a commentary on work relationships. Okay? This is wives, submit to your husbands, not women, submit to men. Okay? And so what I've circled here is the institution of marriage. There's a husband, there's a wife, there's children. And the first thing to say is that the Christian view is that this is not socially constructed. We can't just go to the government, have them redefine marriage as a man and a man, or otherwise, or as a man and 8 women, because a marriage is reflecting the heavens, it's reflecting creation itself. And a holy marriage is one thing, and you might have unions and you can call them different things, but it's only a marriage if it's a sacrament. That would be the traditional Christian perspective. And so it's important to recognize that this word submission is really hard, because people think it means authority, it means dictatorial. I tell you what to do and you do it. You've submitted to me, and that's not at all what it is. So the first thing to recognize is that we all submit to something. And if you don't submit to something, you're lost, right? Submitting to something is going under that thing, saying, I want to work in this direction. I want to have union in order to ascend in the direction that we share. So submission is not slavery. Christian submission is willful. It's unification toward a common goal. Right? When we say amen, can you give me the definition of amen?
Let it be.
Let it be. So when you say amen, you're saying let it be. You're willfully joining in with the person that said the prayer. Or the pastor gets up and gives a prayer. We all respond amen. We're saying us too. Right? So it's willful. The next thing to point out is that we usually just quote that first verse, and what comes after I think is very interesting. In the pink, I've highlighted the directives for the females, for the wives. And in the blue, I've highlighted the directives for the husbands. And so we know that it's calling on the wives to submit and to respect, but let's go through and what is it that it's asking of the husbands. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. Whoa, okay. We're supposed to love at the same level that God loves us. Love at the same level where you descend from heaven into our mortal existence, get betrayed, get tortured, stuck on a cross, stabbed with a spear, buried, descend into hell, and reascend. That's the level of love that is expected of husbands. Okay. And gave himself to her to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of the water by the word. Okay, so you're supposed to wash your wife with the water of the word. And this is word, I believe, rhema, not logos. So what it's saying is that you should be washing your wife with the scriptures. You should be studying the scriptures with her, being faithful Christians together. But you're responsible for her doing that. He did this to present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or anything like that, but holy and blameless. So you're supposed to present your wife before the Lord, spot-free, wrinkle-free, holy and blameless. Ugh. It's a heavy weight.
Better pick a good one, guys.
It's a heavy weight, okay? One's asked to respect and submit, the other's asked to present their partner blameless before the Lord. In the same way, husbands are to love their wives as their own bodies. What does it mean to truly love somebody as much as yourself? And more. To provide for her, to care for her. And for this reason, a man leaves his father and mother and to be joined with his wife. And so I think, what's not said here, but is true, is that when you leave your father and mother, you go out from underneath their umbrella, right? And now you're the umbrella. Now you're the one who's responsible ultimately for for what happens to the people underneath your umbrella, right? Your parents were defending you, protecting you, covering you. If you'd have made a mistake, they were going to pay for it. And now you've left that protection and you're faced with the elements of the storm.
Do you think this is why in Genesis chapter 2 it says this is why, in chapter 1 I believe, this is why a man shall leave his mother and father and cling to his wife? Does it say the woman leaves her mother and father? It says the man shall leave his mother. So he's leaving out from underneath that umbrella.
I believe so. I believe that's what it's saying.
SL.
Yep. Yep. And then to sum it up, each one of you is to love your wife as yourself, and the wife is to respect her husband, right? So all sorts of things come with genuine love, with agapic love, sacrificial love. It means standing in the storm, taking the pain, so that the people beneath you don't have to bear it. So marriage, it's important to realize that marriage is an icon of the church, of Christ and the church, of the relationship between Christ and church. Icon, again, means image. Images reflect the thing that they're an image of. And so what we're supposed to do is make our marriage look like the relationship between Christ and his church. And so we are in the sacrificial role. We're supposed to be sacrificed for the betterment of our families. And that's a high calling. And it's not arbitrary. It couldn't just be the other way. We don't send our wives off to fight with bayonets on our behalf. That's our burden. Another important way of looking at submission, I think, is etymologically submission. Right? We're coming together as two climbers ascending the same mountain. And because we're together, you have a strong left hand and I have a strong right hand, and you brought these resources and I brought those resources. And because we're together and we harmonize together, we can actually ascend much more quickly, much higher, much more quickly. So submission is submission. And in the Orthodox Church, we talk about the royal path, which is like the balance between the left hand and the right hand, a way of being, the masculine and the feminine way of being. You need to have judgment, but you have to measure it with mercy. We need to prioritize the truth, but submit it to love, right? And truth is the first breath. Judgment is the first breath, but we all better hope to hell that mercy is the last one. Right? And this is the way the entire creation is structured, and this is the way we should build our marriages to reflect creation itself. Another beautiful way of looking at it, I think, is submission as a dance. So, if you are having a traditional dance, you have the man and the woman, and just like an inhale-exhale, the way the submission works in this instance is the man pushes and the woman pulls back, right? In harmony with him. He's making the decision, he's setting the timing, he's establishing the direction, he's choosing how high it's going to go and how far you're going to swing and all that, but she has to harmoniously submit to that process. And when she submits, he's allowed to lead, and when he leads and she submits, then you get beauty that flows from it. And I don't know if you've spent much time watching people do this type of dance, but what happens if people are really, really good at it is that the man sort of starts to fade into the background. And it's like the woman who's getting paraded around the dance. She's like a gem on the dance floor being paraded around for everyone to see. Right? And I think this is like the earth embodies the heavens, right? If heaven is properly embodied earth, we get fruit, and fruit is material. This is why heaven, at the end of the day, heaven comes to earth, right? The city and the city, I don't know, Pastor, you could probably say this better than I can, but at the end of the day, in salvation, we don't lose our physical bodies. And so it's like for the heavens are like the purpose for the earth and vice versa. So one starts, one finishes. One sacrifice, one bears fruit. And that fruit is what's being paraded around the dance floor that everybody's mouth agape at. Right? Okay, so the Christian view then on what marriage is, it's, first of all, there is authority involved because there has to be a head, there has to be an ultimate decision maker, but this is much more in terms of sacrificial, selfish, selfless duty and sacrifice to the person you love. And in response, there's voluntary, self-offering submission, and this submission isn't slavery. This submission is submission. It's harmonious pursuit of the same ascent. And that each of the parties in this marriage are completely equal in dignity and spiritual value, but beautifully unique, special, sacred in both their embodied form, their physical bodies, and in the mode of being, masculine and feminine. And what we're trying to achieve is a harmonious dance between these roles. And if instead of all that, what we do is we say, there is no legitimate authority, there are no differences, we're all the same. All these roles are just arbitrary, and we should destroy the whole system. You're standing against beauty itself, you're standing against goodness itself, you're standing against the entire way that the cosmos has been built, you're standing against thousands of years of tradition, you're standing against reality itself, you're standing against God himself. The stakes are high. And then finally, I got 2 more slides here. I wanted to make this really practical, and this is probably like the most risky part of the entire thing because this is like where the rubber hits the road, right? So what I have here is I have it guidance for husbands, guidance for wives, and caution for husbands and caution for wives. And this is the part that if you take it home and just put it in front of your wife, like you're probably up for a fight, okay? So don't do that. And it's meant to be in context with the hour-long presentation that we all just sat through, okay? So maybe burn those 2 pages on your way home. I don't know, but I'll let you guys all discern that for yourselves. Okay, so guidance for modern husbands. If everything I said in this presentation is true, if these patterns are real, then lean into your masculinity. The world tells you that you need to be feminine, only feminine, and it's a lie. It's a filthy lie, and you need to lean into your masculinity and be a good man. But being a good man means embracing your femininity, embracing the softer side. It's not the ideal man to not care, to not nurture, to not cultivate, right? And if you're a wife, lean into your femininity. And by the way, if you're not sufficiently masculine, she isn't able to be sufficiently feminine. These things, one sort of allows for the other, if that makes sense. If you're offering direction, make sure it's virtuous direction tied to God. Nobody's obligated to submit to somebody who's sending them in an ungodly direction. And when you're offering direction, invite refinement. You're expected to offer a direction. You're not expected to have it all figured out or to not be a flawed person. There's the sort of the meme of like the power behind the throne, the queen whispering into the ear of the king. That's not an arbitrary pattern. That shows up in all sorts of stories, and the reason it shows up is because it's true. Because the king is there making these important decisions, drawing these lines of distinction, but he always misses something. He misses the margins, he misses the exceptions, and you need the queen whispering in the king's ear for the king to actually be a proper king. If you're a man, prioritize the truth, but always do it in service of people. And if you're a wife, prioritize the people, the children, the family members, but never compromise on the truth. You see those sort of it's the same thing, but it's balanced in the other direction. You don't just say, well, I'm feminine, screw the truth, or, well, I'm masculine, I really don't give a shit about people. You can't be an ideal man, and she can't be an ideal woman if you're all masculine or all feminine either. Lead the development of a family vision. Have an opinion. Don't be a blank slate. Have a direction. Believe something. Believe that this is what we should be doing as a family, and this is how we should be treating each other, and this is what we should do after dinner together. This is what bedtime looks like. Have a vision for what you think would be a good family, and work with your wife to develop that and embody it, to see it through. Your role will include struggle, will include sacrifice, and you don't have to be, stoic and unmoved and not hurt, and it's okay to cry and things like that. But also, you're meant to bear that burden. That's part of why you're here, and that's involved in your salvation. Because to, let the umbrella down and let the storm fall on your family would be far worse, right? So it's hard to find that balance, I think, but it's worth trying. And then provide, protect, establish order aimed upward. It's kind of repeating myself there. And then I end with, for those still looking for a wife, find a wife worth sacrificing for, And you might be prone to, just focus on looks, or do they have money, or do they have, whatever. But on a spiritual level, the wife worth sacrificing is the if you go back to those slides, the proper feminine, a nurturing mother. Somebody who embodies and wants to see things through and get things done. Somebody who's merciful and caring. These are the things that will actually create beauty in your life. And then caution. Don't confuse force with leadership, right? It's not about control. It's not about tyranny. It's about guiding, leading, offering, sacrificing. And then on the feminine side, you can take care too far. Care can become enablement. If you care without any sort of structure, you're doing more damage to your kids than you would be otherwise. Right? Misdirected care is not care. It's damage. Don't abdicate responsibility and call it nice. Sometimes we might be tempted to be like, I don't want to be the hard ass. I don't want to be the guy holding my kids accountable to bedtime and forcing them to be in a sport or whatever it is, right? I don't want to be the jerk. And so, you know what, I think I'm going to be nicer. I think I'm just going to let them be. And that's true to a certain extent, but if it's abdication, if you saying, well, they'll figure it out, I'm sure they'll be fine, I'm sure they'll mature successfully, I'm sure they'll learn all the things they do, I really don't want to go through the hard work of forcing you to do anything, that's abdication. That's letting the storm come through, right? I'm not going to do the hard work of guiding you in the right direction, I'm just going to let you figure it out. And then on the wife's side, it would be don't reject structure out of pride, right? I think this, the feminism thing has really affected a lot of women over the past 80 years, and I see it all over in people that I know, and a lot of it comes down to this sense of pride. The system told them that if they, success, there's one type of success, and this one type of success is getting a job and going shoulder to shoulder with the men, doing anything that they can do, doing it better. And so now they have that tied up with their identity, and they have that tied up with their pride. And because of that, if they sort of reject some of these ideas, they'll probably be rejecting it out of pride, right? They're rejecting it out of you're trying to control me, you're trying to limit me, and what I'm trying to do through this actually is to free you, not in the modern definition of freedom, which says you can do whatever the hell you want, but in the Christian view of freedom, which is the ability to do what you ought, the ability to do what you were meant for, the ability to reflect the patterns laid out for you, right? And so these walls, the container that we're putting them in is freedom if it's the right wall, if it's the right container, right? Just like the rules of a board game. If it's just do whatever you want, then we're not even playing a game, right? And so it's hard for modern women, especially, to accept any type of wall as legitimate, and so that's just something to be aware of. And then realizing that responsibility is a true gift, right? Like, we tend to think of responsibility as this burden that's been thrust upon us, and as kids we try to avoid responsibility wherever you can, but the older you get, the wiser you get, you start to realize the responsibility is where it's at. Like, if you don't have anything you're responsible for, then it's because you have nothing meaningful in your life, right? The things that are most meaningful are the things that you have to take responsibility for and work hard for and protect and nurture, etc. And then finally, I would just say again, bringing this back to sacrifice and beauty, this is the plan for Christian marriage. It's not arbitrary. It's not a social construction. It reflects reality itself. It reflects creation. It reflects God himself. And that if we want more beauty in our lives, and I don't mean aesthetic beauty, I mean the puzzle piece finally plopping into place in the perfect alley-oop in basketball. This is beautiful. It's the way things should be. It's the holy order. If we want more beauty in our lives, we start with sacrifice. We fight for it. We do the hard thing to get it. You start by giving, you start by initiating, and then you can receive. That's it.
That's good.
Thank you.